Tonight, we will explore the dark and perilous realm of medieval assassins. These elusive individuals navigated castle corridors and dim alleyways, altering the course of history with a blade and a hushed word. Despite the glamorous portrayal in Hollywood, the reality of being a medieval assassin was far from ideal. Before settling in, kindly consider liking the video and subscribing, but only if you genuinely appreciate my content. Feel free to share your location and current time in the comments. It's always intriguing to connect with viewers worldwide. So, dim the lights, perhaps switch on a fan for a gentle background noise, and let's embark on this evening's journey together. It must be understood that no one in medieval times woke up thinking, "Today, I'd like to assassinate a noble for a handful of silver coins," and the thrill of hiding in a barrel for days. Becoming an assassin was not a chosen profession. It was more of a desperate recourse for those whose lives had taken a bleak turn. Most medieval assassins were not enigmatic hermits trained in secret mountain retreats. They were impoverished peasants, dishonored soldiers, former thieves with sharpshooting skills, or individuals so marginalized by society that they could commit a murder without drawing attention. Those who were well off did not resort to becoming assassins. Instead, they hired one. If you possessed a title, property, or even a single goat, you were considered part of the management, not the workforce. However, if you had recently escaped a debtor's prison, had a knack for problem solving, and could slip into a tavern unnoticed, congratulations were in order. Someone, somewhere was likely to slide a pouch of coins across the table and utter a name that seldom brought joy. Taking out Bob the quiet turnip farmer wasn't a common task. Typically, it was left to deal with a corrupt baron, a bishop overflowing with gold, or someone protected by 12 bodyguards and a surrounding moat. The reward was alluring, the assignment chilling, yet those who contemplated it had reached a point of having nothing to lose. No family, no prospects, and certainly no dental coverage. Moreover, let's not overlook the absolute absence of job benefits. No retirement fund, no honor, no breaks. You couldn't advertise a sign saying, "Discreet eliminations by appointment." You simply had to operate discreetly, act swiftly, and never disclose your occupation to anyone. Especially not loudly in the tavern. Oh yes, I'm a wandering carpet merchant. The stains, well, they vanish. Hence, no one aspired to become a medieval assassin. They found themselves there because life had worn them down, and they emerged as shady figures holding a rusty blade. You weren't the hero, nor were you the villain. You were the obscure reference that made everyone uneasy, likely not surviving long enough to enjoy the payment. Let's dispel the foremost misconception. Medieval assassins didn't undergo training in some secluded monastery with wise mentors and inspiring flute melodies in the background. There were no lessons, no instructors, no motivational talks. If you learned anything, it was by narrowly avoiding death in your initial attempts. Most assassins lacked professional training. They were desperate novices with a decent sense of direction and the ability to scale in silence without a sneeze. Having military expertise was advantageous, as it indicated you knew how to wield a blade correctly. Otherwise, stabbing someone was instinctual, but managing to escape intact with both kidneys was a different matter, requiring either skill or, more often, luck. Manuals were non-existent. No formal guild orientations or safety briefings were given. Learning how to identify a body double or locate nobles' bedroom exits wasn't part of the curriculum. Those skills were acquired through trial and error, often while dangling from a windowsill and questioning if you had mistakenly entered the servants' quarters again. Experimenting with poison was a risky endeavor, with outcomes ranging from success to merely making the target suspicious of their soup. There was no medieval poison control hotline to consult, only reliance on hope, herbal remedies, and a strong stomach. Occasionally, fortunate individuals might have acquired knowledge from thieves or mercenaries, or perhaps a seasoned assassin demonstrated how to move silently on cobblestones. However, mentorship was not the norm in this profession. It was scarce and fleeting because assassins typically vanished instead of retiring. Weapon training was not comprehensive. Instead of wielding a broadsword, you typically carried a stolen dagger or, for special occasions, a garrote, concealed under your cloak. You were not a mysterious martial arts expert, but rather a person with rough hands, quiet steps, and a peculiar fondness for alleyways. Success stemmed not from formal training, but from adapting quickly, making mistakes, and disappearing before your identity could be memorialized on a church door. Your education was harsh and practical, lacking any celebratory ceremonies, only leaving behind bruises, bloodstains, and the sobering realization of your solitude. The primary motivation for entering the assassin's trade was the allure of money, though the truth of the matter was that the compensation was primarily in deceit. When an individual employs an assassin, they seek a one-time service without long-term commitments. The client typically provides partial payment up front in silver, with the remainder promised upon completion of the task, contingent on their satisfaction. However, completion may also involve ensuring no mistakes were made, no evidence left behind, and no chance of the assassin revealing any information. The aftermath may involve the client disappearing without paying or attempting to harm the assassin. Compensation seldom feels sufficient for the risks taken, the violence involved, and the uncomfortable circumstances endured during the mission. Furthermore, some contracts turned out to be traps, leading the assassin into dangerous situations with no legal recourse. Therefore, assassins learn to be cautious, seek upfront payment, and trust no one in their line of work. The one who described this task as life-changing was a liar. Taking on the role of an assassin meant living with unfulfilled promises and disappearing before the pressure crushed you. Despite being deceived about the payment, you have accepted the assignment, knowing that death is a likely outcome. Now, let's discuss the equipment. Disregard the imaginative tales and stealthy video games. There were no gadgets like retractable wrist blades, smoke bombs, magical daggers, or collapsible crossbows hidden in your boot. Your equipment consisted of items that you could steal, sharpen, or conceal under a worn cloak without making noise. If you were fortunate enough to find a valuable dagger, it was plain, straight, and hopefully free of rust and unpleasant odors. Poison was a reality, but it was not as romantic as depicted in stories where it is poured slowly into a chalice. In the medieval world, poisons were unpredictable and made from various sources like plants, minerals, or amphibian organs. Some poisons acted instantly, while others had delayed effects, causing victims to vomit for days and become wary of food. Ropes had their uses for strangulation, climbing, or securing objects, but mastering their use swiftly was crucial to avoid awkward situations while struggling with them. Bows were effective if properly wielded, but carrying one discreetly through a palace disguised as a florist was a challenge. Most assassinations required close-range attacks, emphasizing speed, silence, and cleanliness to prevent accidents. There were no backup options if your blade failed, so precision and care were paramount. Improvising was essential in your line of work. For instance, you might use materials like slate roof tiles, rusty nails, or shoe buckles with purpose. In desperate times, you concealed your tools in various places such as hems, boots, or even inside hollowed-out bread. These tools were kept close not just for safety, but because in your profession, your weapon was everything. Your best friend, your employer, and your sole retirement plan. There were no upgrades or gear modifications between assignments. You didn't bother polishing your equipment. You only hoped it wouldn't fail you during a critical moment. Ultimately, it was not the weapon, but you, ill-equipped and expected to work wonders with meager resources, that was responsible for the killings. As an assassin, your targets were significant figures like nobles, bishops, military officers, and even royalty. Eliminating them was no simple task. They were heavily guarded by numerous armed and fed sentinels, stationed strategically around the premises. Memorizing patrol routes, creaky doors, and guards' habits was crucial. Castles presented additional challenges with their various defenses like murder holes and moats teeming with dangers. Even if you managed to navigate these obstacles, you had to contend with arrow slits and boiling oil. Your role sometimes involved the risk of being mistaken for an intruder and suffering dire consequences. Moreover, dealing with the castle staff was equally delicate. Any suspicious behavior could trigger them to inform the guard captain promptly. Assassins weren't just combating swords. They were also navigating through a web of risks and uncertainties. Combating rumors during medieval times was crucial, especially when it could determine life or death. The individuals had every reason to be paranoid in a world full of deceitful family members aiming for their titles and numerous acquaintances with hidden motives. They had to be cautious at all times, testing their food, securing their sleep with multiple locks, and going as far as sleeping in different rooms or using decoy beds. Despite the enticing prospect of attending a grand feast, infiltrating and getting close to the target was an arduous task involving disguises, bribes, and elaborate plans. The assassination had to be executed flawlessly in one swift and silent move to avoid meeting a public demise. In reality, medieval assassins did not resemble the common perception of dark and mysterious figures, but rather looked like ordinary individuals in worn-out attire, scavenged from various sources, aiming to blend in with the general populace. Your behavior appeared suspicious as you continuously adjusted your belt to conceal a dagger wrapped in cheesecloth. Forget about masks. There were no Guy Fawkes options available. Most face coverings made you resemble a leper, which was effective for avoiding conversations, but not ideal for entering social gatherings. In case anyone inquired about your identity, you had to come up with a quick response. Presenting myself as Brother Tobias, in charge of silent prayer and rooftop maintenance, seemed plausible. Even if you managed to bypass the guards, aristocratic households were not oblivious. Servants readily detected unfamiliar faces, particularly those who mishandled chamber pots and couldn't identify the cook's cat. Standing out would likely result in being struck with a candlestick. If your disguise was successful, you needed to sustain your act for hours without drawing attention from potentially dangerous individuals passing by. Wigs were non-existent, so altering your appearance to look older or younger meant resorting to smearing dirt on your face, squinting, and hoping nobody would inspect your beard closely, which was attached with honey. Your disguise provided only a brief moment of confusion, giving you a slim window to disappear, blend in, or convincingly maintain your facade. If your ruse was exposed, it would be disastrous, especially being caught in compromising attire, such as a nun's habit with a sword, particularly on a festive occasion. In medieval times, assassins operated solo, devoid of a team or supportive resources like crossbow-wielding sidekicks, ingenious alchemists, or encouraging handlers issuing coded messages. Armed with only a rusty dagger and deep-seated trust issues, guilds were non-existent in that era. Scarcely any trustworthy individuals were found in this line of work. Rumors of an assassin brotherhood were merely idle chatter, often sparked by alcohol and boredom. Encountering a fellow professional assassin seeking networking opportunities was as rare as meeting a ghost. The reason for such isolation was clear. In this profession, anonymity meant longevity. Every connection posed a risk, and a loose tongue could lead to one's downfall. Even clients were kept in the dark about one's true identity, with plans always in place for a quick exit. Building relationships was out of the question, as friends would ask probing questions, and lovers would notice telltale signs of one's violent occupation. Settling down was a luxury that could not be afforded, as a single mistake or a chance encounter in public could turn life into a desperate race for safety. Even fellow criminals preferred to keep their distance from those who made individuals disappear. Thieves and smugglers were sociable, but assassins were viewed with fear or considered a liability. Sharing a meal with someone whose profession attracted danger was not on anyone's agenda. Expressing the difficulties of sleeping after committing a heinous act would only lead to suspicion or fear. Thus, maintaining secrecy about one's past, injuries, and weapons was paramount. In inns, one would occupy the darkest corner, constantly vigilant and never consuming too much alcohol. Staying for a single night and revealing a false identity only upon receiving payment became the norm. The life of a medieval assassin revolved around mastering the skill of disappearing without a trace. Failing as a medieval assassin meant facing a brutal and theatrical death rather than a mere warning or critique. A missed kill jeopardized the entire mission, exposing the assassin and putting a target on their back. If caught, the consequences were severe, with the possibility of being tortured or pursued by their own clients. There were no second chances in this high-stakes world of deadly precision and unforgiving expectations. For assassins, survival equals perfection. If you don't excel, you might as well invite trouble and prepare your final words. Your past successes don't matter. What counts is your most recent kill. With each job, the pressure is on to deliver flawlessly. Once you've carried out the hit successfully, there's no time to celebrate. Instead, it's time to flee through dark alleys, dogged by pursuers and the threat of revenge. There's no opportunity for relaxation or camaraderie. The focus shifts to escaping the onslaught of those seeking retribution. Planning your escape strategy is as crucial as planning the assassination itself. From alternative routes to disguises to safe houses, the city goes on high alert, and there's no room for mistakes. The client, if they intend to pay, won't be waiting in a cozy tavern. Instead, everything is shrouded in secrecy and danger. Upon receiving a thank you card from an assassin, it would likely disappear quickly. The recently completed job had left the assassin as the most dangerous individual alive, due to the knowledge they possessed. Their exceptional ability to access restricted areas had painted a large target on their back, despite their success in earning payment. The aftermath involved a week of evading pursuit by staying in modest accommodations, bribing boat captains, disguising oneself, such as adopting the persona of Brother Lucian to blend in with traveling monks. Triumph did not equate to survival. It entailed commencing the cycle anew in a different city with an altered identity, while being sought after by an increased number of pursuers. Consequently, the successful kill only marked the beginning of a desperate escape. The challenges faced by medieval assassins extended beyond poverty, being hunted down, and residing in unsavory locations that emitted unpleasant odors. They also contended with the imaginative paranoia exhibited by those around them. In the medieval era, assassins were not merely viewed with dread. They were regarded as ominous beings. To common folk, these figures were not merely cloaked killers, but rather perceived as accursed individuals who communicated with demons and carried out sinister rituals under the moon's glow. The ability to elude guards effortlessly and vanish into darkness was attributed to mysticism rather than rational thinking. Superstition pervaded society, spawning beliefs that assassins possessed shape-shifting abilities, were invisible unless bathed in sacred waters, or had formed pacts with woodland entities capable of inflicting death through solid barriers. Picture strolling through a hamlet while overhearing a woman caution, "Avoid making eye contact. He may cast a spell on the infant." Even the tools associated with assassins, such as carrying a dagger, were viewed skeptically, assumed to have been crafted in a... The cursed forge wasn't about chemistry, but witchcraft, possibly stirred with a severed toe under a blood moon, inducing fear. Despite expecting avoidance due to your reputation, superstitious mobs reacted worse, throwing stones and shouting threats, assuming you could summon lightning. Any unexpected death triggered suspicions of involvement, leading to whispers and potential persecution for merely being nearby. This constant threat forced you to keep moving to evade angry mobs or accusations of sorcery for possessing odd items or a foreign accent. In a world where monsters disguised themselves as humans, appearing too quiet, clever, or fast, labeled you as a danger. The notion of poison as an elegant assassin's tool was far from reality in the Middle Ages, as obtaining reliable poisons was challenging, unlike today's purified lethal substances or fast-acting pills. Instead, medieval poisoners had to rely on plants, mushrooms, minerals, or even toads, making their deadly concoctions unreliable and difficult to administer effectively. Poisoning in medieval times was a risky and inefficient method of assassination. Without precise measurements, the poison could either cause the target a stomachache or lead to death. In chaotic medieval kitchens, sneaking in poison was not easy. Nobles treated meals like military operations, having them tasted and checked by various people. Even if the poison went undetected, the effects were unpredictable, some acting quickly, while others took days to show symptoms. Survivors would likely blame the person with herbal knowledge and suspicious behavior, not the cook or taster. Getting caught meant harsh interrogation and being accused of poisoning everyone. Therefore, poisoning was full of risks and uncertainties, far from being an efficient method of changing history. As an assassin, your name would never be etched into memory by eliminating a tyrant, disrupting a royal bloodline, or squashing a political threat. You were destined to remain a shadowy figure, a mere whisper, or a mysterious individual with cold eyes. Even if you executed the most significant hit of the century, your demise would merely be noted as a perplexing incident. This was precisely the intention. Your client sought anonymity and protection from any potential repercussions. Maintaining secrecy was paramount in your line of work. You didn't seek recognition or acclaim. You operated silently and swiftly, ensuring there were no loose ends that could jeopardize your client's safety. In the realm of assassins, silence and discretion reigned supreme, with no room for glory or honor. Your legacy was one of obscurity, notoriety, and a chilling, cautionary tale for those who dared to challenge authority. Your existence was fleeting, leaving behind no trace but a whispered memory of a ghost-like figure lurking in the shadows. In the medieval world, disappearing was the expected outcome. Being recognized was dangerous, as heroes were remembered while assassins were eliminated. Surprisingly, you survived, completed the task, and received payment. However, now you must remain inconspicuous and hope your client keeps their promise to safeguard your identity. Yet, in the realm of medieval assassination, a cardinal rule was to never trust anyone, especially the one who hired you. Clients, whether noble, merchant, or ambitious clergy with questionable ethics, didn't engage your services out of admiration. They needed a dreadful deed done and deemed you the most skilled agent. Once the job was done, you became a risk, aware of sensitive information like who wanted someone killed, when, why, and what price they would pay. This knowledge made you a threat not only to their adversaries, but also to them. So what did they do? They distanced themselves from you, denied any affiliation, or dispatched someone to silence you more permanently. Some even overlapped contracts, hiring one assassin to complete the task and another to eliminate the first thereafter, ensuring minimal exposure. Trying to extort or expose a client was audacious and fatal, as influential figures in that era didn't negotiate with assassins. They swiftly dealt with them. If your client possessed a semblance of honor, a rarity indeed, you might receive suitable repercussions. Even after being paid and left alone, one would need to assume they were being observed from afar, with someone already honing blades and studying their movements. They embodied a hidden enigma, a fleeting presence. Achieving success did not guarantee trust, as to others. If one had killed before, they were capable of doing it again. No one wished to be the next target, not even the individual who had enlisted their services. Suppose by some miraculous stroke of luck, they surpassed the challenges, outliving their adversaries, employers, and perhaps even their own conscience. What next? Retirement was out of the question. Assassins during medieval times did not enjoy retirement benefits, heartfelt farewells, or pensions in gold coins with words of gratitude. They did not gracefully transition into a serene existence, but rather vanished or met an untimely demise, often both outcomes. The predicament was straightforward. Safety was never assured. Even if one walked away from their profession, their past lingered on. They harbored too many secrets, remembered too many names, and bore the weight of too much bloodshed. People did not desire their retirement. They sought their erasure, a fate typically resulting in burial. Even in the absence of immediate threats, which was a rare scenario, there persisted a constant dread that someone might come after them. A new, eager assassin aiming to make a name for themselves could have just received a contract targeting a mysterious, once dangerous figure. Accordingly, they altered their identity once more, settling in a remote village where inquiries were not made. They feigned disabilities, marketed herbs, masqueraded as a former guard. Despite these efforts, peaceful slumber eluded them. They evaded gatherings, always positioned themselves towards the exit, and perpetually remained on edge. Your dagger was hidden beneath the floorboard alongside a forgotten pouch of coins that carried a lingering scent from the man who bestowed it upon you. Trust was a luxury you couldn't afford, tainted by the years of silent assassinations and narrow escapes which had taken a toll on your psyche. The mere sound of a knock at the door sent shivers down your spine. Every unfamiliar face on the road, a potential threat. Dreams were abandoned for fear of their peril, leaving behind a trail of disconnected emotions. Love, relaxation, and carefree laughter were all distant memories. Living in a perpetual state of vigilance, you existed as a mere specter masquerading as a human. The fate of a medieval assassin was bleak, devoid of an endgame, destined to fade into obscurity through a solitary, unnoticed demise. The romanticized notion of being a medieval assassin was far from reality. It was a harsh, ungrateful profession, marked by brief longevity, soaked in blood and pursued by adversaries. One would not endure, faltering within days or even hours due to misguided expectations of grace, control, and stealth, only to face the grim reality of hunger, exposure, and imminent capture. Each mission would unravel the illusion of mastery, revealing a string of miscalculations and missteps that would swiftly unravel any facade of anonymity. The cloak of invisibility would soon lift, exposing the fatal flaw in your meticulously crafted plan, turning you from a phantom to a liability in a heartbeat. What happens next? You start running, but navigating the medieval landscape is unfamiliar to you. The mud, the uneven cobblestones, and the countless loose chickens in the street all pose challenges. You slip and fall, then are tackled by a guard named Thomas, who, recently heartbroken, is seeking an outlet. If you manage to survive that encounter, you will have to face the consequences. There will be no allies, no sense of honor, and no promising future ahead. Instead, you will be met with whispers, suspicions, and the dawning realization that even in success, the best outcome will be living out your days in obscurity, isolated, and aging under an alias in a village that still believes in fairy tales. Therefore, it would be unwise to attempt such a path. The life of an assassin was not glamorous. It was a merciless mechanism that consumed individuals and left behind only shadows. It promised power without peace and purpose, without a true belonging. Rather than making a mark in history, you would fade into oblivion, met only by a silence that would go unquestioned as your existence went unnoticed. Before ascending as the formidable Queen of Macedonia, Olympus was known as Myrtale, a princess hailing from the rugged tribal lands of Epirus. Her people claimed a lineage tracing back to Achilles himself. While the authenticity of hero blood in her veins remains debatable, one undeniable fact emerged. She was not destined for a passive role in history. Myrtle's upbringing was steeped in enigma, ceremonies, and reverence for ancient deities, intertwined with politics and prophecies. She defied the conventional image of a princess, content with delicate tasks, instead being drawn to serpents, omens, and the fervent rituals of the cult. Dionysus was a place where women performed barefoot dances in the moonlight, entering trances to connect with the divine. Her relationship with the gods was not just a show. It was deeply personal. She didn't simply offer worship, she embodied it. As recorded in ancient texts, likely penned by both terrified and fascinated men, rumors swirled that she housed sacred snakes in her quarters, even letting them curl up next to her in bed. Whether this was truth or the type of gossip that powerful women often attract remains a mystery. However, the idea stuck. To her supporters, it elevated her to a divine status. To her adversaries, it made her a threat. Her true influence did not stem from battlefields or royal courts, but from the dim light of torches, amidst the murmurs of priestesses and the winding forms of serpents. She was more than a mere princess. She was a living oracle, a woman touched by something ancient, beyond politics, and colder than steel. When Philip II of Macedon, a ruthless, intelligent, and notoriously lustful man, came to the island of Samothrace for a religious ceremony, he encountered not only a beautiful princess, but also an enigma that captivated him. Their union was not just a strategic marriage. It represented a convergence of prophecy and authority. From the outset, it was surrounded by signs and portents. There were tales of lightning illuminating the sky on their wedding night, and whispers of Olympias dreaming of a thunderbolt entering her womb. These stories would eventually become the stuff of legend. Nevertheless, one thing remains clear. The union of Olympias and Philip didn't just result in a child. It brought forth Alexander the Great, and she was intent on guiding his fate from his very first breath. Olympia's marriage to Philip II was far from the typical fairy tale romance one might envision for a queen who would later give birth to a vast empire. Right from the start, it was a volatile mix. A mixture of prophecy, pride, and paranoia characterized the union of Philip and Olympias in 357 BCE. Despite being just a teenager, Olympias was far from naive. She saw in Philip a man with ambitions matching her own, and possibly a divine connection to her spiritual destiny. Macedon presented a challenging realm, known for its strong will and where family members often turned into adversaries overnight. However, Olympias, as the priestess of Papyrus, walked confidently, setting her sights on the throne. From the outset, their marriage was tumultuous due to Philip's inclination towards multiple marriages, driven by political reasons and a quest for power. Yet, Olympias refused to fade into the background, establishing her own court, forging alliances, and consulting oracles to discern the future, including that of Philip. The birth of Alexander was laden with celestial symbolism, with tales of Olympias dreaming of thunderbolts striking her womb and flames encircling her child unscathed. Philip, too, reportedly envisioned sealing his wife's womb with a lion. Though the belief in these visions remains uncertain, both Philip and Olympias seem to regard Alexander as destined to not only rule a kingdom, but the entire world. Nevertheless, tensions in the royal marriage heightened as Olympias harbored resentment towards Philip's other wives, particularly Cleopatra Eurydice, a Macedonian whom he wed later in life. This discord extended beyond personal grievances and posed a significant threat, given Cleopatra's Macedonian lineage, which would grant any offspring she bore a higher status in the eyes of the populace. The local nobility posed a direct threat to Alexander's future, a fact Olympia recognized vividly. She viewed the palace not just as a residence, but as a battleground. She was determined to ensure her son's legacy and ascension to the throne by utilizing all her resources, from cunning plots and dreams to ancient rituals and clandestine whispers. Shedding her former identity as Myrtle, she embraced the role of Olympus, guarding her son's claim to the throne with unwavering determination. As Alexander matured, the Macedonian palace in Pella transformed into a hostile environment, filled with subtle insults, political strategies, and fierce rivalries. Olympus fought not only for power, but for her very existence, fully aware of the treacherous court dynamics. Despite Philip II's increasing detachment and reliance on Macedonian advisors, Olympus remained formidable. instilling fear in those around her. When Philip married a noblewoman named Cleopatra Eurydice, Olympia viewed it as a personal affront and a provocation. The wedding celebration turned into a calamity as Attalus, Cleopatra's uncle and one of Philip's top generals, publicly questioned Alexander's parentage, insinuating divine origins. However, Olympia cleverly seized the opportunity, turning the insult into a myth that elevated Alexander's status as a chosen one. After the humiliation, Alexander and Olympia retreated from Macedon, with Olympia seeing her exile as a strategic maneuver rather than a defeat. In her homeland of Apris, she maintained her royal status, garnering support and subtly plotting her next move. Witnessing Philip's palace deteriorate from afar, Olympus didn't need to be physically present to pose a threat. Philip's assassination at his daughter's wedding, just before invading Persia and crowning himself as the potential emperor of the known world, sent shockwaves through the corridors and halls. The burning question on everyone's mind was, who was responsible? Could it be Porcinius, the spurned bodyguard who carried out the deed? Or perhaps it was a result of court intrigue. Some even whispered that Alexander himself could be behind it. Or dare they consider Olympus? Although no concrete proof emerged, suspicions ran rampant. Soon after, Cleopatra Eurydice and her newborn met a tragic end. Rumors swirled that Olympus had a hand in their deaths, marking her return to the palace and signaling her son's path to the throne. In the midst of mourning and confusion, Olympus seized the opportunity to eliminate potential threats swiftly and mercilessly. By ridding herself of Cleopatra Eurydice and her infant daughter in a brutal and public manner, Olympus demonstrated her understanding that in royal courts, mercy is a vulnerability. With her rival's bloodline extinguished, Olympus could now focus on securing Alexander's position. Declaring bold and brilliant, and having received training from Aristotle with little opposition, he was made king. It wasn't merely his charm or his father's legacy that led to this. It was Olympias. She skillfully manipulated the right generals, nobles, and foes to secure her son's ascent to power. She wasn't just defending his rise, but orchestrating it. Alexander didn't always agree with her methods, particularly the violence against Cleopatra's family. However, he allowed it to continue as he understood what Olympias had always known. Power requires sacrifice. As her son ascended to the throne, Olympias started to step back from public life, not retiring, but shifting her influence from overt actions to subtle manipulation. While Alexander readied to conquer Persia, she remained in the background, guiding his destiny spiritually. By sending him sacred items, consulting oracles, and conducting rituals on his behalf, she reinforced his divine mission. While Alexander went off to expand his empire, Olympias stayed in Macedon, a queen with covert authority. Despite technically passing on the regency to Antipater, she refused to be marginalized, constantly advising, warning, and sometimes scolding her son through letters. The affectionate mother sent heartfelt letters filled with political insights and sharp critiques to Alexander, who was far away. Olympias fearlessly pointed out his true enemies, questioned his companion's loyalty, and criticized his interest in Persian customs, choice of wives, and flirtation with calling himself a god. Antipater in Macedon grew resentful, as Olympia constantly undermined him, using her status and family connections to rally opposition against him in various regions. Meanwhile, her urgent letters to Alexander warned him of Antipat's ambitions, portraying him as a potential betrayer like Philip. Despite her concerns, Alexander hesitated, needing Antipater to maintain order in Greece as he focused on his Asian campaign. The divide between mother and general widened as Olympia, became increasingly impatient. Watching as Alexander's empire expanded, she saw him relying too much on foreign advisors and drifting from the mother and gods who she believed contributed to his victories. Olympia was determined not to be ruled by an old soldier after enduring years of palace conflicts. Upon hearing about Alexander's demise in Babylon reaching Macedon in 323 BCE, it did not come as a joyful announcement, but rather as a devastating blow for Olympia, who saw it as the crumbling of the empire she had helped construct over many years. Her son, the force of nature she had foreseen, nurtured, and unleashed, had departed, leaving behind a chaotic aftermath. The empire he had established was already showing signs of division as his generals, vying for power, began to splinter his conquests. Amidst this turmoil, Antiparta, a powerful figure in Macedon and Greece, posed a threat to Olympia, as did the attempts of rival generals to secure Alexander's sister Cleopatra's hand in marriage, hoping to claim the throne through her lineage. Understanding the impending civil strife, Olympia knew she had to take action once more. Though she lacked Alexander's presence, she found solace in his offspring, particularly his young son, Alexander IV, born to Roxana, a princess Alexander had wed. Olympia knew the child was now the final link to her son's heritage, and both a vulnerable target and a potent tool in the political arena. Forming an alliance with Roxana and the young heir, Olympia was resolute in safeguarding them and leveraging the boy's lineage to assert her own authority in the ensuing power struggle. Despite facing formidable opposition from the ambitious generals who now sought dominance, Olympia stood unwavering, drawing strength from her previous encounters with treachery and royal adversaries. Unfazed by a few warlords donning crowns and wielding stolen spears, she devised a plan. Patiently, she observed the passing of Antiparta and the rise of his son Cassander, a man as cold as ice, with no patience for the games of the old queen. The clash between these two forces was inevitable. Despite Alexander's absence, his influence lingered. Olympus, poised to strike, remained entwined within his legacy. Years after Alexander's demise, amid the empire's descent into civil strife, Olympia orchestrated her boldest move yet. She returned to Macedon not as a grieving mother, but as a formidable political force driven by divine wrath. With the regency in disarray and Cassander, the son of her former foe Antipa, seizing control while Roxana and young Alexander IV were essentially captive, Olympia recognized the urgency of the situation. She foresaw her grandson's fate slipping away, and thus struck a pact with the aging General Polyperchon, a remnant of legitimate authority. Olympus didn't seek mercy but dominion. Supported by Polypon, she led an army into Macedon. Upon her arrival, everything transformed. Towns welcomed her, soldiers swayed to her cause, and even former adversaries hesitated in her presence. Despite her advanced age, Olympias remained a name that reverberated powerfully. Her retribution followed swiftly as she systematically pursued Cassander's loyalists. The climactic moment arrived when she captured and subsequently ordered the execution of Philip III. Aradus, Alexander's mentally incapacitated half-brother and puppet king. Reports suggest his wife Eurydice was taken captive and given a choice to end her own life. Upon her refusal Olympus's act, Olympus orchestrated the strangling of her perceived rivals through a display of power and authority, cloaked in royal customs. This brutal act, staged theatrically as if a goddess dispensing justice, aimed to assert that only the bloodline of Alexander was fit to rule, branding all others as impostors. At that fleeting moment, Olympia wielded control over the kingdom, re-establishing the dynasty, seeking retribution for treacheries, and exhibiting the formidable might of royal authority when in the hands of a determined woman. However, power in Macedon proved as precarious as fire in dry grass, especially as Cassander, with superior forces and a calculated strategy, mounted a formidable challenge. As her allies deserted her and Polyperon's influence waned, the tide of fortune shifted against her. Isolated within the fortress of Pydna, Olympia faced encroaching enemies, led by Cassandra, who sought to fulfill his father's ambitions. Despite the dire circumstances, Olympus, once a figure of dread in the ancient world, stoically endured the siege within the coastal stronghold, unwavering and defiant, embodying a regal stature reminiscent of a deity's wrath. With supplies dwindling, illnesses spreading, and allies fading away, she maintained a demeanor befitting her esteemed lineage until the end, standing resolute, as though a divine figure rather than a captive. While Cassandra deliberated on the peril of eliminating Olympus, recognizing the aura of myth still surrounding her as the mother of Alexander the Great, her presence remained a formidable obstacle, underscoring the complexities of confronting a woman of her stature. Appearing sacrilegious, he proposed her protection. "If you surrender," he offered, "your life will be spared." Olympia doubted his words, having witnessed many royal pledges crumble. Nevertheless, the pangs of hunger had turned into a fatal threat, prompting her garrison's collapse and followers' submission. Eventually, Olympias, resolute until the end, was relinquished to her adversaries. Cassandra opted not to end her life personally, a fate deemed too swift and merciful. Instead, he delivered her to the families of those she had sentenced during her brief resurgence to authority, leaving her destiny in their hands. They sentenced her to death. Yet, when the executioners arrived, none dared to strike first. Displaying a regal stature, Olympia stood unwaveringly, gazing at them like an oracle piercing through haze. These were Macedonians, raised on tales of her ceremonies, prophecies, and serpents. Once, they hailed her son as a divine being. Now, facing a frail elderly woman enveloped in legend, not a single soul dared wield the blade. Consequently, Cassandra dispatched foreigners unfamiliar with her legacy, solely instructed to carry out orders. And thus, Olympus met her demise. The end wasn't ceremonial or dignified. It concluded in silence. Her passing signified the extinction of Alexander's lineage from influential authority, extinguishing the final spark of a realm founded on divine aspirations. Yet, even in death, Olympus cast a lingering presence, ensuring she would always be remembered as the Serpent Queen, departing not from a throne, but from the ground, defenseless, forsaken, and executed by those she once governed. History, however, is peculiar, often not favoring those who meet their end on luxurious linens. Olympus doesn't forget those who perished with a whisper. It was never intended for silent tales. During her lifetime, she used motherhood and prophecy as tools of power. She wasn't solely Alexander the Great's mother, but a key figure in his ascension. Without her, the legendary divine child narrative wouldn't exist. The rituals hinting at thunder and lions would have been absent. The ruthless elimination of adversaries to pave the way for a young king to rule the world wouldn't have happened. Olympus wasn't just the birthplace of an empire, but its fierce protector. Among ruthless leaders of antiquity, Olympia was unique. Unlike Cleopatra or Boudica, she didn't lead armies or enter battles. Her battlefield was a realm of poison, political unions, priestesses, and prophecies. Olympia comprehended the strength of instilling fear and, more significantly, faith. She persuaded people of her son's divine nature, maybe even believing it herself. Critics labeled her as a murderer, witch, and manipulator, and they were not entirely mistaken. Olympia was all those things and more, shaped by a world valuing cunning over kindness. She grasped early on that queens couldn't afford mercy. Over the centuries, she was both demonized and romanticized, seen as a villain or a seer. However, no historian, ancient or modern, could deem her insignificant. She haunted Alexander's legacy like a phantom, forever lingering in the shadows. Perhaps that was her rightful place, not as a tragic mother or a side note in a king's tale, but as a narrative of her own. The woman draped in prophecy, resting beside Olympia's bones have long turned to dust, but her legend lives on through the tales of ruthless queens. The essence of her story persists in every whisper of a bloodline's destiny and in the foundations of empires based on mythology, where she remains concealed in the shadows, patiently waiting. Located on the sun-bleached island of Crete, just a short distance south of the modern city of Heracleion, lies a ruin that seems more akin to a vision than a tangible reality. The labyrinthine corridors of stone twist in various directions, leading to rooms that intertwine and staircases that seemingly lead to nowhere. It remains easy even today to become disoriented within this place known as Knossos, the core of Minoan civilization and the purported prototype for the enduring myth of the Minotaur's labyrinth in human history. Before the emergence of the legendary tale, there stood a palace like no other, constructed around 1900 BCE and gradually expanded over time. Knos wasn't simply a regal dwelling. It was an entire metropolis encapsulated under one roof, encompassing nearly 150,000 square feet. It boasted over 1,000 chambers, light-filled wells, storage facilities, sanctuaries, workshops, and, potentially, the earliest examples of flushing toilets in ancient history. With functioning water systems, multi-tiered residences, and a sophisticated air circulation network, this wasn't just a primitive fortress, but a true architectural marvel. For contemporary archaeologists, Knos presents itself as organized pandemonium, while to ancient visitors, it likely appeared magical. The individual who brought Knos to the forefront of modern consciousness was the British archaeologist Arthur Evans. In the early 1900s, Evans conducted excavations at the site and swiftly became convinced that this location was the focal point of the Greek labyrinth myth, the layout's disorienting nature, the profound symbolism within its architecture, and the prevalent motifs of bulls adorning walls, etched into stone, or crafted into delicate gold amulets, all added to his conviction. Ultimately, the bull held sacred significance for the Minoans. Evans named the civilization after the legendary King Minos, whether Minos truly existed or not. His myth became closely tied to the ruins. Surprisingly, a physical labyrinth has yet to be discovered. Instead, what exists is a fascinating city layout filled with intricate loops, wings, and layers intentionally designed to confuse. The boundaries between reality and myth become increasingly unclear. The deeper one delves into the place. Was the Minotaur a creation of these walls, or was the palace itself the monstrous entity? Knossos may not readily reveal its secrets, but it excels at prompting profound questions. The iconic myth features a monstrous being, half man and half bull, confined within an intricate labyrinth that entrapped all who dared to enter. Only the Athenian hero Theseus successfully slew the creature and escaped through the clever use of a thread provided by Princess Ariadne. How did this tale originate? And why a labyrinth? Ancient accounts trace back to King Minos, the formidable ruler of Crete, who demanded an annual tribute from Athens, 7 boys and 7 girls. These unfortunate youths were sacrificed to the Minotaur, a symbol of divine retribution and disgrace lurking within an underground maze. To the ancient Greeks, Crete was a realm of opulence, enigma, and dread. The seafaring Minoans were viewed as both graceful and enigmatic, with rituals involving bull-leaping divine figures depicted in their art, and palaces unlike any seen on the mainland. For a Greek visitor circa 1000 BCE, Knossos represented a realm of allure and uncertainty. Potentially, it may have seemed like entering into a different realm. The Minoan people held the bull in high reverence. Paintings depicted youths leaping over charging bulls in ceremonial acts. Symbolic bull horns, known as horns of consecration, adorned rooftops and altars. When combined with a labyrinth-like palace, the ingredients for a legendary tale emerge. However, what if the Minotaur was not just a mythical creature? What if it represented something else? Some scholars suggest the story reflects a memory of Minoan dominance over other civilizations, such as the Athenians, who once paid homage to a more powerful and enigmatic authority. The maze might symbolize the political ensnarement of weaker nations, with the Minotaur embodying the fearsome force supporting Minoan supremacy. Others argue for a more psychological interpretation, seeing the labyrinth as a metaphor for the human subconscious, the Minotaur as our hidden desires, and Theseus as the courageous figure venturing into the unknown, led solely by the thread of memory. Nevertheless, this legend remains intertwined with uncertainties. The palace discovered is the most labyrinthine structure known to us, devoid of monsters or Ariadne. Yet it may represent something more profound, not merely a tale echoing across time, but a historical account transforming into myth. Long before the grand temples of Athens or the sharpened spears of Sparta, the Minoan civilization thrived as one of Europe's earliest advanced societies. They governed not through conquest, but through commerce, artistry, and what appeared to be an otherworldly mastery of architecture. At the core of their influence stood Knossos, a palace serving not only as a royal residence, but as a nexus of art, custom, and commerce. Flourishing from approximately 2600 to 1400 BC, the Minoans, based in Crete, established an extensive trade network spanning from Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Levant to the distant coasts of Spain. Navigating through seas with their advanced ships, silent arrows from the Mediterranean carried pottery, saffron, bronze, and luxury goods, enriching the people by fostering relationships rather than building vast armies. The unique Minoan culture starkly contrasted with their later Greek successors, as their artwork celebrated nature, animals, and human movement over themes of war or divine retribution. Vibrant frescoes depicted dancers, dolphins, and athletes leaping over bulls, while their goddesses were often depicted as powerful, bare-breasted figures holding snakes symbolizing fertility, transformation, or protection. At the heart of their civilization was Konos, a complex in a fertile valley, devoid of massive defensive walls, indicating a sense of security or a projection of power that rendered defense unnecessary. Their advanced architectural achievements, including multi-story buildings, colonnaded courtyards, and sophisticated plumbing systems, showcased a society far ahead of its time. Despite their sophistication, the mystery of the Manoans endures, as their undeciphered linear A script offers no insight into their identity or beliefs, leaving only their ruins, art, and influence, absorbed by later civilizations like the Mycenaeans and reflected in Greek myths. The sophisticated Manoans were not just palace builders, but architects of enigma, with Nos not just a structure, but the pulsating core of a civilization that briefly shone brightly before disappearing, leaving echoes that some believe still linger. In the labyrinth, exploring Knossos is akin to traversing through time itself, a complex, mesmerizing experience shaped by intricate designs wherein rooms flow into corridors indefinitely, divide and disappear. The interior of the building is pierced by shafts of light. The staircases wind into darkness or unexpectedly reveal sunlit courtyards. There is no straightforward path to follow. It is easy to understand why ancient visitors may have whispered about a maze. Knossos was not merely a palace. It functioned as a living entity, covering approximately 150,000 square feet. The compound housed over 1,000 chambers, ranging from small to grand. These chambers were intentionally positioned, serving various purposes such as workshops, storage areas, shrines, living quarters, and audience halls clustered around a sizable central courtyard where public ceremonies or bull rituals may have taken place. The palace was constructed on different levels, reaching up to 4 or 5 stories in some areas, utilizing natural slopes and man-made terraces. To navigate through it successfully without becoming lost, one would require a good memory, instinct, or a guide like Theseus's thread. However, beneath this apparent disorder lies a remarkable ingenuity. The Minoans mastered natural ventilation, cooling chambers using air ducts and open staircases. They directed rainwater through clay conduits and had functioning toilets long before it became fashionable in Rome. One of the most recognizable sections is the so-called throne room, featuring an alabaster chair mounted on the wall surrounded by benches. Adorning the area are frescoes depicting griffins, mythical protectors. Was this where a priest-king sat? Or perhaps the chamber of a deity, a sacred tribunal? No one can say for sure. The walls themselves communicate through color. Lively frescoes exhibit dolphins swimming above tubs, women adorned in flowing skirts but bare-chested, and youths leaping over bulls in midair. The artwork was not just for embellishment. It represented their essence, fluid, organic, deeply connected to land and sea. Yet, delving further into Knossos begins to perplex. Certain sections appear deliberately intricate, almost as if designed to bewilder. Perhaps this is the origin of the labyrinth myth, not a confinement. The palace wasn't just a mere structure for monsters, but a vibrant place, evoking awe, tradition, and a hint of fear. There were no locked doors or mythical creatures present, just a space designed to make you ponder your surroundings and anticipate what lay ahead. Nos was more than an administrative hub or royal dwelling. It was a sanctuary, a representation of the Minoan culture, rich in tradition, legend, and spiritual enigma. Unlike the later Greek temples honoring Zeus or Athena, with grand columns and marble shrines, Knossos' spiritual essence was intricately intertwined within the architecture itself. Sacred shrines were discreetly placed. Pillars stood tall as revered guardians. Horns, stylized and symbolic, adorned rooftops and altars. Throughout, the bull motif prevailed, hinting at a significant link between worship, nature, and this esteemed animal. The Minoans didn't fear the bull. They revered it. The renowned bull leaping fresco in Nos wasn't merely a display of athleticism, but a potential religious ceremony. Young men and women leaping over a charging bull engaged in a ritualistic dance of peril and elegance. It wasn't merely a sport, but a sacred performance, possibly an offering to the deities or a symbolic victory over chaos. The discovery of the snake goddesses in storage rooms beneath the palace was a significant find. These figurines, among the most recognizable Minoan relics, depicted bare-chested goddesses with raised arms, holding serpents or with snakes coiled around them, exuding authority. They weren't passive idols, but protectors of the household, fertility, and the essence of life. To the Minoans, snakes symbolized renewal, rebirth, and enigma, representing beings of both earth and the underworld. The spaces where these artifacts were unearthed hinted at domestic shrines or sacred areas, secluded corners steeped in quiet reverence. Within the bustling heart of the palace, along with the frescoes, horns, altars, and labyrinthine corridors, the entire complex starts to resemble a ritualistic machine, a construction created not only for dwelling, but for communing with the divine. In Nos, there was no central temple because the palace itself served as a place of worship. Its arrangement, artwork, and structure were all elements of a spiritual perspective in which the boundaries between sacred and secular were blurred. Here, myth transformed architecture, converting a corridor into a pathway to the deities, where every sound reverberating in the stone chambers might have been a silent prayer uttered. Nos didn't merely host people, it hosted gods, standing for centuries as a symbol of wealth, advancement, and cultural refinement. Nos suddenly encountered an unexplained event around 1400 BCE, leading to its abandonment, the fading of the frescoes, and the disappearance of the powerful Minoan civilization that once dominated the seas. Speculations on the cause of this mysterious turn of events are abundant. Some attribute it to natural forces. The eruption of the Thera volcano around 1600 BCE, now known as Santorini, unleashed one of the most monumental explosions in human history. The ensuing tsunamis likely devastated the northern coast of Crete, affecting ports and farmland. With ash clouds potentially blocking sunlight, crops could have suffered, disrupting the climate and economy. Though not immediately destroyed, the aftermath of the volcanic eruption might have profoundly shaken the region's economic, political, and spiritual foundations. Others suggest warfare played a role. By 1450 BCE, the flourishing power of the Mycenaeans, mainland Greeks, may have exploited Minoan vulnerabilities. Archaeological findings indicate a brief reoccupation of Nos, but with evident cultural shifts, featuring more militaristic art and the replacement of the Minoan script, Linear A, with Linear B, used by the invaders. Mycenaean recorders, the once prosperous palace filled with snake goddesses and bull dancers, was now speaking a different language. Some experts suggest that the Mycenaeans did not conquer the island in one swift attack, but gradually integrated themselves into the culture, initially through trade, then through influence, and ultimately through governance. Others debate that internal discord, a rebellion, political uncertainty, or the decline of the ruling class might have played equally significant roles. Noteworthy is the lack of violence apparent in the remnants. No burnt bodies, no indications of wide-scale slaughter. Nos did not collapse with a loud bang. It crumbled with a whisper. The grand palatial structure merely ceased to function. The chambers fell silent. The ceremonies ceased, and nature began its slow reclaiming process. By the time Homer mentioned Crete in his epic poems, Nos was already a distant legend, a memory intertwined in tales of monarchs, creatures, and mazes. This might be fitting, because what brought about the downfall of Konos was not only volcanic activity or invasion, it was the passage of time, and how all magnificent things, regardless of their beauty, eventually disappeared under the shadow of new empires. However, the remains endure. If you pay attention, the labyrinth still vibrates below the ground. For centuries, Knossos lay hidden under the Cretan earth. Just another pile of rocks lost to history. Its name erased, its legends twisted, its structures swallowed by olive orchards and dust. That changed when one individual decided to pursue a story. He was known as Sir Arthur Evans. In 1900, Evans, a dramatic British archaeologist with a profound affection for Homeric myths, acquired the property covering the ancient ruins. Local farmers had stumbled upon peculiar seals and artifacts, hinting at something monumental beneath their feet. Evans began excavating. What he uncovered would revolutionize. The Aeon history was forever changed by one man. He stumbled upon an immense and intricate palace that he was certain was the legendary home of King Minos. The various clues, like the frescoes, horns, and unique architecture, all seemed to point to one thing in his opinion: the labyrinth. This man, Evans, was not just an archaeologist, but also a skilled storyteller, sometimes sparking controversy. He named the builders of Konos as the Manoans, in honor of Minos, interpreting symbols, reconstructing frescoes, and even using reinforced concrete to restore parts of the palace. This controversial restoration has both supporters and critics, with some praising it as visionary, while others condemn it as vandalism. The site at Knossos today is a blend of ancient remains and Edwardian creativity. Despite differing opinions, Evans achieved what no one else dared to do. He brought Konos back to life. By doing so, he offered Europe a window into a civilization from the Bronze Age that predated classical Greece, revealing a world of art, mystery, and maritime sophistication. In addition to this remarkable discovery, Evans also unearthed the Linear A script, a still undeciphered writing system that raises new questions about language, literacy, and historical knowledge. But Evans' contributions extended beyond unearthing stones. He revived a myth and compelled historians to confront the reality behind the legend of the labyrinth, a complex and very human civilization that had faded into obscurity. By peeling back the earth, Evans uncovered a saga more extraordinary and beautiful than he could have imagined. For 3,000 years, Nos had slumbered, until Evans sounded the alarm that awakened it. Walking through Knossos isn't just navigating through architectural wonders, it's deciphering a language woven with symbols. Everywhere you look, in the frescoes, carvings, and patterns, the Manoans left behind a visual narrative. Unfortunately, their intricate script remains a mystery, challenging modern scholars to unlock its secrets. Rather than deciphered, one remains a mystery. Instead of understanding their thoughts, we must observe them depicted on plaster, inscribed on walls, and embedded in designs. What was their intended message? The artwork of Knossos stands out from all other ancient civilizations. There is no focus on war, no lineups of monarchs or battle-hardened warriors. Instead, we encounter nature, joyful dolphins, blossoming lilies, soaring birds, and revered bulls. The human figures are lively, graceful, often engaged in dance or ceremonial acts. Even in scenes hinting at danger, there exists a sense of harmony and elegance. The Minoans were not documenting conquests. They were honoring life cycles and perhaps cosmic harmony. One of the most symbolic motifs is the double axe, or labrie, seen across Knossos in temples, frescoes, and etchings on stones. It is believed to hold religious significance, possibly linked to female divinity or celestial cycles. Some theories propose the term labyrinth may originate from labris, suggesting it is not a maze but a sacred realm, a sanctuary of the double axe. Additionally, the horns of consecration, stylized bull horns placed atop walls and altars, likely marked sacred areas from the ordinary. Coupled with frequent depictions of bulls and bull-leaping ceremonies, it is apparent that these animals held profound spiritual importance, whether symbolizing nature, fertility, disorder, or divine presence remains debated. Yet, the bull is a recurrent motif. The layout of Knossos may also carry symbolic implications. Some scholars speculate it was constructed not merely for practicality, but to mirror celestial or seasonal patterns. The maze-like corridors and interconnected rooms could symbolize a passage through life, death, and the underworld, a spiritual journey, not a physical confinement. However, in the absence of a deciphered script, every theory treads a fine line between enlightenment and speculation. The Minoans communicated through symbols rather than stories, leaving us to decipher their meanings. Despite hearing the rhythms and seeing the imagery, the true significance of Na's messages eludes us, resembling a thread unraveling into myth. While Nos stands in ruins, its essence feels vibrant when walking through its corridors today, with a subtle energy pulsating beneath the surface, not haunted by ghosts or gods, but resonating with echoes of ancient myths, lives, and questions that persist through time. Millennia after its downfall, Nos continues to captivate us within its intricate maze. Visitors explore its passageways, researchers search for explanations, and writers craft new stories inspired by its legacy. Although the rulers of Nos remain unknown, their devotion to beauty, nature, and the harmony between architecture and art is evident. Before the existence of the Parthenon, Rome, Hebrew temples, or Persian palaces, Knossos stood as a grand palace city temple intertwined with legends. The labyrinth symbolizes more than a mere prison or puzzle, embodying a narrative etched in stone and architectural form, shaping the myth of the Minotaur. The intricate corridors, bull rituals, and awe-inspiring ambience of Knossos inspired the narrative of the Minotaur, stemming from the labyrinth's enigmatic design and profound impact on generations. In the field of archaeology, Knos has always encompassed both history and legend, allowing us to explore its ruins during the day. Despite being able to document and reconstruct its artwork, the enigmatic nature of Knos persists. The distinction between reality and myth remains elusive, much like a mirage on hot stone. Perhaps this enduring mystery is what keeps Knossos intriguing, as it withholds complete answers, prompting us to experience history rather than solve it. Nos, with its ancient and intricate nature, poses a profound question that compels us to delve deeper, akin to Theseus following the guiding thread. Early engineers displayed cunning by designing primitive handheld rams used by soldiers to breach enemy defenses. The evolution of the ram into a formidable weapon involved mounting it on a wheeled frame for improved efficiency and crew protection. The Assyrians, skilled in siege tactics, integrated rams into towers equipped with archer platforms, inflicting destruction upon besieged cities while under constant attack. The imagery from Nineveh portrays iron-tipped rams approaching city gates like agents of devastation. The ram's role extended beyond gate destruction to exploiting wall weaknesses, toppling watchtowers, or annihilating entire gates. Rams symbolized a stark ultimatum: yield or witness the collapse of your fortifications. Greeks enhanced the design, while Romans perfected it with the construction of colossal rams known as ares, suspended within fortified structures. Massive siege shelters, some of which required numerous men for operation, were known for the thunderous sound resembling rolling stones. Despite their sheer power, battering rams demanded effective teamwork to keep them swinging in unison while fending off attacks from above. A malfunctioning ram meant failure. Yet, when in full swing, a battering ram was unstoppable, pitting wooden strength against human masonry and ancient physics turned weaponry. This was just the start of engineers' tactics to breach fortifications. If the battering ram was a brute force, the catapult was the strategist. While rams operated up close, catapults attacked from afar, instilling fear through launching stones and psychological warfare. These early artillery pieces were a game changer in siege warfare, utilizing physics in ways that seemed almost magical to enemies. Originating in the Greek world around the 4th century BCE, the earliest catapults were the brainchild of brilliant minds aiming to enhance warfare with increased range and power. Commissioned by Dionysius the Elder of Syracuse, the torsion-powered catapults were a feat of innovation, utilizing twisted bundles of sinew or hair as tension springs for precision and fear tactics in sieges. By tightly twisting ropes, typically fashioned from animal sinew, engineers could amass significant potential energy that propelled projectiles like stones, javelins, and even flaming objects over hundreds of meters. The ballista, resembling a giant crossbow, and the stone-throwing catapult were the two primary types developed rapidly, showcasing the evolution of siege warfare strategies. The throwing of boulders over walls or directly at fortifications was common in ancient warfare. Roman engineers then improved upon Greek designs by developing catapults that could be disassembled, transported on carts, and reassembled on site, making them portable siege engines suitable for professional armies. These Roman catapults were capable of launching 60 stones at high speeds, enabling them to break through wooden gates, battlements, and occasionally unfortunate soldiers. Catapults were not only used for causing destruction, but also for creating awe-inspiring spectacles. Ancient generals utilized them to convey messages, sometimes quite literally, by hurling corpses over walls to spread disease and fear, or by tossing severed heads into besieged cities to crush morale. In a particularly haunting instance, diseased bodies were launched into enemy territory as an early form of biological warfare. Despite their effectiveness, catapults had drawbacks such as being cumbersome, requiring skilled operators, and being limited by challenging terrains. Nevertheless, when positioned correctly, they could overwhelm a city from a safe distance. The advent of catapults shifted the focus for cities, as they needed to withstand aerial assaults in addition to ground attacks. The trebuchet, a superior weapon in medieval siege warfare, was a formidable sight on the battlefield, conveying the message that no walls could offer protection. Unlike tension-powered catapults, the trebuchet relied on gravity, operating on a basic principle of a long swinging arm, mounted on a robust frame with a heavy counterweight on one end, and a sling on the other. By raising and dropping the weight, the arm would swing around, launching the sling and its lethal payload in a high arc over enemy defenses with precision and predictability. The trebuchet has a fascinating history, originating from ancient Chinese models in the 4th century BCE that employed manpower instead of counterweights. The version that revolutionized siege warfare in Europe and the Islamic world appeared in the 12th century, possibly influenced by Byzantine or Muslim sources. Once introduced to Europe, the trebuchet quickly became widespread across castles and during crusades, showcasing its impressive power. Capable of launching hefty projectiles over 300 nahars, trebuchets could wreak havoc by demolishing towers, walls, and demoralizing the enemy with furniture-sized stones. One unique feature was its ability to skillfully catapult objects over walls, striking courtyards, barracks, and supply depots inside, such as diseased animals, burning pitch, or insulting messages. The legendary Warwolf trebuchet at the siege of Stirling Castle in Scotland was so intimidating that the enemy surrendered before it was even used, prompting the king to delay accepting the surrender to test its might. Despite its slow construction and reload times, as well as the need for skilled operators, no other siege weapon matched the trebuchet's combination of range, power, and psychological impact. It was akin to a medieval slow-motion weapon from above, with cities trembling as the counterweight dropped, while catapults and battering rams attacked from a distance. Siege towers offered a more direct approach, rolling up to the enemy's doorstep to unleash armed invaders like a mobile wooden skyscraper, adorned with damp hides to resist fire and brimming with archers and spearmen. The siege tower represented the ancient equivalent of an armored personnel carrier, combined with a mobile fortress. When one of these massive structures advanced towards the city walls, it signaled the imminent commencement of a fierce battle. Siege towers were not subtle, but rather grandiose and incredibly effective if utilized correctly. The Assyrians were among the earliest to employ these towers in the 9th century BCE. Yet it was the Greeks, and particularly the Hellenistic kingdoms, that brought the concept to dramatic heights. During the siege of Rhodes in 305 BCE, the Macedonian general Demetrius constructed a colossal 9-story tower named the Helopolis, or Taker of Cities. Standing at over 100 feet tall, it was armed with catapults, shielded by iron plates, and maneuvered by a multitude of soldiers. Despite collapsing under its own weight, the tower showcased unparalleled ambition. Siege towers operated on a straightforward principle. Walls are only effective if they cannot be breached. These towers negated this advantage by providing an elevated platform for attackers to descend onto the battlements, bypassing gates and ladders. From the top platform, archers could unleash havoc on the defenders, while troops on lower levels prepared to storm the walls. However, these towers were not impervious. They were sluggish, prone to mud, and easily targeted by defenders employing fire arrows, rolling stones, or sabotaging the terrain. Astute defenders would create obstacles like ditches, moats, or secondary inner walls, known as counterscarp defenses, to impede the tower's progress. Nevertheless, when siege towers succeeded, they did so magnificently. A breach in the wall was one thing, but finding your own ramparts suddenly swarmed with enemy soldiers created utter chaos. Siege towers altered the battlefield dynamic from a horizontal strength competition to a vertical assault. In a competition for survival that involved climbing vertically, individuals used height as both an advantage and a disadvantage. Once the gangplank descended from a siege tower to the city walls, there was no possibility of retreat. The time had come for intense hand-to-hand combat. Amidst rams battering and trebuchets launching, some of the most destructive siege maneuvers took place silently below ground. Siege tunneling, also known as sapping, was a sinister strategy to conquer a city by undermining its very foundation. The concept, though ancient, was remarkably effective. The process involved digging beneath the enemy's wall, shoring it up with wooden supports, and then setting those supports alight. As the timbers burned down, the tunnel collapsed, carrying away the wall's base. In an instant, a significant portion of the outer wall would crumble like stale bread, without any grand machinery or loud launches. Tunneling, though lacking glamour, was a methodical and unseen assailant in fortress warfare. While early versions were practiced by the Assyrians, the technique was refined by the Greeks, Persians, and later medieval European armies. During the siege of Plateo in 429 BCE, the Spartans tried tunneling beneath the walls, only to be met with defenders digging counter-tunnels to thwart their efforts, resulting in subterranean conflicts akin to a nightmare. This defensive strategy, known as countermining, introduced an eerie aspect to siege warfare. Picture soldiers digging deep underground in total darkness, relying on their senses to detect enemy activity. At the first sound of tapping, they would rush to intervene, leading to chaotic skirmishes lit by torches and involving knives and shovels. This grim process lacked glory, filled only with fear, dirt, and suffocation. However, when successful, undermining had devastating consequences. One of the most notorious instances occurred during the siege of Rochester Castle in England in 1212. King John's forces utilized a tactic where they dug tunnels underneath the southern wall, filled the tunnel with pig fat, and ignited it, causing the supports to collapse and bring down the entire tower above. Subsequently, the defenders were taken aback and eventually surrendered. By the 13th century, siege experts specialized in identifying weak foundations, evaluating soil behavior, and orchestrating collapses with exceptional precision. They combined the roles of geologists and demolition experts. While tunneling necessitated time, manpower, and a touch of daring, it exemplified a fundamental truth of siege warfare. If scaling the wall or penetrating it was not feasible, undermining it from below was an alternative. Siege warfare's theatrics were not solely the domain of the attackers. Defenders had their own cunning tricks, some of which were particularly formidable. Among these was Greek fire, developed by the Byzantines in the 7th century CE. Greek fire was a mysterious incendiary substance, similar to napalm, that could adhere to ships, walls, and flesh, persisting in combustion even on water. Whether sprayed from siphons or hurled in clay vessels, it incited scenes of utter pandemonium. The precise composition of Greek fire remains unknown to this day, as its formula was closely guarded and perished with the empire, though its devastating effects became legendary. Within minutes, entire naval fleets were reduced to blazing skeletons, illustrating just the beginning of its destructive potential. In less sophisticated defenses, scalding liquids such as boiling water, oil, or sand were employed as primary armaments. These liquids were poured through murder holes, small openings in the ceilings of gateways or towers, directly onto assailants below. Oil, in particular, instilled fear due to its ability to cling to skin, permeate clothing and armor, and then be ignited. Envision attempting to scale a castle wall only to be met with a downpour of boiling substances from above. Approaching a castle with a siege ladder often resulted in encountering an unquenchable fire. while not as visually striking, scorching sand was equally ruthless. It would sneak into the crevices of armor, particularly around the neck and wrists, inflicting severe burns by scalding the skin beneath. From afar, it may seem unimpressive, yet it could swiftly reduce brave warriors to agonizing screams. Defenders also employed the principles of physics to their advantage. Gravity was transformed into a weapon, dropping massive stones, logs, or even deceased animals from battlements onto siege machinery or densely packed troop formations. The objective was not solely to cause casualties, but to shatter both the equipment and the morale simultaneously. Additionally, traps were strategically positioned, such as concealed pits, collapsing bridges, and spiked barriers. Castles were transformed into intricate, pain-inducing puzzles intended to obstruct, disorient, and penalize aggressors. All these tactics shared a common goal: creating delays. Every moment a fortification endured brought the enemy closer to dwindling supply lines, rampant diseases in their camps, or reinforcement arrivals. Siege warfare revolved around attrition. Despite the assailants leveraging physics, defenders harnessed ingenuity and seething fury. In the realm of siege warfare, outright devastation constituted only one facet of the strategy. The other aspect focused on psychological domination, breaking the resolve of the defenders prior to breaching the fortifications. Siege engines transcended mere war implements. They symbolized colossal creaking instruments of impending calamity, engulfed in flames. Each grinding wheel of a siege tower and every soaring projectile from a trebuchet aimed to instill a singular notion in the minds of those within the walls: no refuge here. This awareness was not lost on ancient commanders. The Assyrians paraded their siege machinery ostentatiously, parading them triumphantly across desolate landscapes. The Romans boldly established their siege encampments within plain view. In times of siege, the enemy would stage a performance, assembling battering rams and testing catapults in plain sight of defenders. Fear played a key role in this theatrical display. Sometimes, the projectiles themselves carried a powerful message. Messengers or generals' severed heads would be launched over the walls, often still clad in their armor. During the siege of Constantinople, not only rocks but also bodies were used to bombard the defenders. Diseased corpses were hurled to incite panic and spread plague. It is believed that during the Mongol siege of Kafur in 1346, tossing plague-infected bodies over the walls contributed to outbreaks of the Black Death in Europe. The trebuchet was more than just a weapon. It served as a declaration. The arrival of one of these mighty machines was announced by sounds that reverberated throughout the fortress: the groaning of winches, the creaking of ropes, and the heavy thud of the counterweight, akin to the heartbeat of an impending storm. The element of surprise was the most perilous aspect, as the defenders never knew what to expect next. Would it be a giant rock, a flaming barrel, a barrage of arrows, or just an eerie silence? The psychological impact of these sounds was leveraged as well. The rhythmic pounding of a battering ram or the sudden hush before an attack would torment the defenders with suspense. Commanders aimed to instill hopelessness in the enemy, making them believe that resistance was futile, that their deities had forsaken them, and that their fortifications were mere temporary barriers against destiny. Ultimately, when the enemy's morale crumbled, the gates often opened without a struggle. In the late medieval era, with the introduction of gunpowder onto the battlefield, traditional siege engines gradually fell out of favor. However, their influence endured. The development was gradual. The introduction of cannons had a revolutionary impact. A single, precisely aimed cannon shot could accomplish in mere moments what it took trebuchets hours to achieve. Once deemed impregnable, stone walls became weaknesses. By the 15th century, the majestic castles of Europe were deteriorating, not due to tunneling or flames, but due to iron projectiles crashing through their fortifications. Siege warfare had advanced, becoming explosive, ruthless, and thunderous. Despite this evolution, the fundamental principles established by ancient siege engineers endured. Present-day artillery still reflects the influence of catapults and trebuchets. Every advanced ballistic missile and long-range howitzer can be traced back to the same fundamental challenge. How do you breach what is meant to be impenetrable from a distance? Concepts like physics, trajectory, tension, and force, which were explored, experimented with, and perfected centuries before the advent of gunpowder, continue to be relevant. Even contemporary military tactics, such as shock and awe, overwhelming firepower, and clear demonstration of dominance, have their origins in ancient siege strategies. The towering siege engines advancing with flags fluttering in the wind were the earliest forms of shock and awe. They were not just about breaking through walls. They were about crushing the morale of a city. The enduring legacy of these ancient tactics can still be seen in the remnants of ancient cities. At Masada, where Roman siege ramps still mar the desert landscape. In Constantinople, where layers of defensive walls stood resilient against various siege machines for a millennium before succumbing to cannon fire. In castles across Europe, where circular towers and angled bastions narrate the tale of a world continuously adapting to withstand the next siege. Even in today's era of drones and satellite-guided missiles, siege warfare has not disappeared. It has gone digital. Cities are still besieged. Defenders are still besieged. Walls now come in the form of firewalls, blockades, or even information blackouts. Nevertheless, the essence of the siege endures. Both sides are engaged in a conflict. One seeks entry, while the other aims to block it. They are both patient, strategic, and determined to emerge victorious through construction and destruction. Battering rams and trebuchets are no longer in use, yet the essence of siege warfare remains potent and impactful.